It was a quiet afternoon when I found myself standing in the dimly lit hallway of my parents' house, holding a piece of paper that felt like a ticking time bomb. My husband, Mark, and my mother-in-law, Linda, stood across from me, their expressions a mix of smugness and disdain. The paper they had just handed me was filled with absurd terms, phrases like transferring the house to my husband and not complaining about anything, and at the bottom, there it was, my mother's signature. My heart sank. This couldn't be real. It had to be a scam. I looked at my mother, who was sitting quietly in her armchair, her eyes distant. "Mom, did you sign this?" I asked, my voice trembling. She nodded slowly, her voice calm and detached. "Yes, I did. It's my handwriting." My mind raced. Someone must have forced her to sign it. She wasn't in her right mind. This was clearly a scam. Mark chuckled, a sound that grated against my ears. "See, Jessica? It's all settled. The house is mine now." I clenched my fists, anger boiling inside me. "This is invalid. You can't just take our home like this," I protested, but my words seemed to bounce off them like they were made of stone. Mark's eyes met mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something. Regret, maybe? But then he looked away, and the moment was gone. "You should be grateful, Jessica. This is for the best," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. I felt like I was in a nightmare. Just a few weeks ago, my father had passed away after a long illness, leaving my mother and me to fend for ourselves. My mother, who had been showing signs of dementia, was now more vulnerable than ever. And now this. I couldn't believe that Mark, the man I had shared my life with for so many years, would betray me like this. The days that followed were a blur. My father had left us with a mountain of medical bills, and my part-time job at the hair salon was barely enough to keep us afloat. Mark had always been dismissive of my concerns, telling me I worried too much. "Fires can start from unattended flames," he would say, brushing off my fears about my mother's condition. But now, with my father gone and my mother needing more care than ever, his indifference stung even more. "Why don't you quit your job and take care of her?" he had suggested one evening, his voice casual, as if it were the simplest solution. But I knew better. I loved my job, and I couldn't afford to lose it. Besides, I had no intention of becoming completely dependent on him. "Even a crane would feel the urge to pay a favor," I had snapped back, frustration boiling over. "Doesn't he have any consideration at all?" But my words fell on deaf ears. Mark had already made up his mind, and nothing I said seemed to penetrate his stubborn resolve. Then one day, everything came to a head. My father had been hospitalized, and I was struggling to balance work and caring for my mother. Mark's parents had come over to help, but their version of help was to take over the house. "The house has already been passed on to the eldest son and his wife," my mother-in-law had announced, her voice firm. "The renovations are about to start soon. You two need to leave." I was stunned. "What do you mean?" "This is my parents' house," I protested, but my mother-in-law just shook her head. "It's settled. Your mother signed the papers." I looked at Mark, hoping for some support, but he avoided my gaze, his silence speaking volumes. Desperate and confused, I tried to reason with them, but it was no use. My mother-in-law's words echoed in my mind. "Someone who does nothing and an old person who needs lots of care can be a handful, right?" I felt like I was being erased, my existence reduced to a burden. As we were being escorted out of the house, Mark handed me a completed divorce form. "You should sign this," he said, his voice cold. I looked at him, disbelief and anger warring within me. "Is this what you want?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, his expression unreadable. I took the form, my hands shaking, and without another word, I walked out of the house, my mother trailing behind me. As we drove away, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with overwhelming sadness. I had lost so much, but at the same time, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was a chance for a new beginning. With nowhere else to go, my mother and I found ourselves in a small, rented apartment. It was a far cry from the comfort of our old home, but it was a start. I threw myself into my work at the salon, grateful for the distraction. My mother, too, seemed to find solace in the routine of our new life. She helped out around the salon, tidying up and chatting with the clients. It was as if she had found a new purpose. One day, as I was contemplating how to make ends meet, I received a job offer that seemed like a godsend. It was for a mobile beauty service, providing home visits for clients who couldn't make it to the salon. It was perfect. I could work and still be there for my mother. I accepted the offer, and with the help of my former boss, I was able to purchase a used single-family home in a nearby town. The house had previously been used as both a residence and a hair salon, and it was the perfect setup for my new venture. Life settled into a new rhythm. My mother and I worked together, and she proved to be an invaluable assistant. Her memory lapses were still there, but they seemed less frequent. She enjoyed gardening in her free time and chatting with the neighbors who were kind and supportive. The salon was slowly gaining clients, and I felt a sense of pride and accomplishment that I hadn't felt in years. Then, one day, Mark showed up at the salon. My heart skipped a beat when I saw him, but I quickly steeled myself. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice firm. He looked around, a smirk playing on his lips. "I need a shampoo and cut," he said, his voice casual. I raised an eyebrow, disbelief washing over me. "Are you serious?" I asked. He nodded, his expression unreadable. As I washed his hair, I couldn't help but wonder what he was up to. Was he here to gloat? To apologize? But his next words caught me off guard. "I received an eviction notice from the real estate agent," he said, his voice tinged with anger. "You sold the house, didn't you?" I was taken aback. "What are you talking about? I haven't sold anything," I replied, confusion clouding my thoughts. Mark's accusation hung in the air, and I felt a surge of anger. "You sold that land and house, didn't you?" he repeated, his voice rising. I shook my head, frustration bubbling up. "I have no idea what you're talking about," I said, my voice firm. But then a thought struck me. My mother had mentioned something about letting go of the family home. Could she have done it without telling me? As the pieces started to fall into place, I realized that my mother had taken matters into her own hands. She had orchestrated the sale of the house, using the money to secure our future. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. My mother, who had been dismissed as forgetful and confused, had been the one to save us. Mark's expression turned sour when I confronted him with the truth. "You can't just take what's mine," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. But I stood my ground, my resolve unwavering. "It's not yours anymore," I said, my voice steady. "It's time for you to leave." In the weeks that followed, I learned that Mark and his parents had tried to return to their old home, only to be turned away by the eldest son and his wife. The house had already been transferred to their name, and they wanted nothing to do with Mark and his manipulative ways. The eviction notice had been real, but it was Mark who was being evicted, not us. My mother and I continued to build our new life, and I found myself feeling grateful for the unexpected turn of events. The salon was thriving, and my mother was happier than she had been in years. Her memory lapses were still there, but they seemed less frequent, and she was more engaged with the world around her. As I looked back on the events that had led us to this point, I realized that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as challenges. My mother's strength and determination had saved us, and I felt a renewed sense of hope for the future. Life is unpredictable, and the journey we have been on has taught me that. My mother's courage and my own resilience have brought us to a place of peace and stability. The salon is a testament to our hard work and perseverance, and it has become a haven for those who seek beauty and solace. As I sit in the quiet of the salon, I reflect on the twists and turns that have shaped our lives. The shadows of the past have faded, replaced by the light of a new beginning. My mother and I have found our way, and I am filled with gratitude for the unexpected blessings that have come our way. In the end, it is the love and support of those around us that matter most. My mother and I have each other, and that is enough. We have weathered the storm, and now we are ready to embrace the